Tonight, Portage, Indiana wants the Bears, and they're offering a stadium paid for neither by taxpayers or the team. Tell me more. Marmar Martinez sues the government and releases new evidence appearing to show immigration agents ramming into her instead of the other way around. The Department of Homeland Security on the eve of shutting down. We visit with Republican Congressman Darren LaHood amid furious news in D.C. on that and Epstein. And it's United versus American Airlines in the battle for new gates at O'Hare.
And welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Paris Schutz. It's a Bears feeding frenzy right now. Iowa wants in. How about Wisconsin? I mean, let's just bring every state into the mix here. Now, today, a new spot in Indiana threw its hat into the ring. The town of Portage, right off the Ogden Dunes. And that town's mayor released detailed renderings of a $5 billion stadium complex and coined the all-new, quote, Hallis Harbor, offering fans marine-themed tailgating or sailgating opportunities. So here's the most notable thing about the proposal. Taxpayers will foot none of the bill. Here's the other thing. Neither will the Bears. So how does that work? Well, let's hear the mayor tell us more about this proposal.
What we've envisioned for the site, as we've acquired more property and put it together, is to have a site that's master developed to create a community that's both commercial and residential, more dense and taking advantage of its transit connection to the train, its connection to the waterway and Lake Michigan and the highways. And quite frankly, the Bears only enhance that plan because as a major stadium development, it certainly brings in the exact kind of community the city's been planning for years to have here.
So the financing mechanism, we're told it's something brand new. The idea is hatched by Chicago investor and philanthropist Lou Weisbach. His basic premise is that investors foot all the upfront costs and then they get paid back through the future ticket revenue of concerts that the stadium will hold for years and decades into the future. Now, Weisbach explained this idea over the phone today.
If you think about the escalation in prices of tickets, think about if you bought a Taylor Swift ticket 10 years ago. Right. Or if you bought one today and you realize that the people that are putting up the money to build this new stadium are going to get that spread in return, they're going to be getting that extra money. Right. So it's a great investment, and yet it's a great answer where we no longer necessarily need taxpayer dollars to build stadiums because there's a new way to do it.
So interesting concept. Not sure if it totally works, but where does that leave everything with the Bears? Sources say it's still primarily down to Arlington Heights versus Hammond, Indiana. Now, Illinois lawmakers, we reported this week, have been meeting with the team regularly and are close on agreement, they say. Indiana has passed its bill out of the state Senate to have the state own and finance a stadium there, but the House Speaker wants a commitment from the Bears before moving forward. And moving our lens to D.C. right now, a heated showdown on Capitol Hill as Attorney General Pam Bondi fields nonstop questions about the government's handling of Jeffrey Epstein and more. In addition, Bondi talked about investigations into the Minnesota immigration raids where 2 Americans were killed. Still, much of the criticism from lawmakers was related to whose names were redacted and whose were not in that Epstein dump. U.S. Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin asked Bondi to apologize directly to Epstein's victims for not indicting anyone tied to Epstein's crimes in her first year.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Epstein survivors who are here today. I am deeply sorry for what any victim has been through, especially as a result of that monster.
To the survivors in the room, if you are willing, please stand. And if you are willing, please raise your hands if you have still not been able to meet with this Department of Justice.
It's Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib there. Now, at what time the exchange got fiery? Well, it got fiery many times when U.S. Rep. Raskin accused Attorney General Bondi of filibustering, quote, like she did in the Senate. Then Bondi fired back with a pointed rebuttal. Take a listen.
I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, oh, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
You're a lawyer, not even a lawyer.
Committee will be in order.
Very unusual behavior for one of those hearings, even though they do tend to get contentious. Now, Chicago's shooting victim, Marimar Martinez, is turning the tables on the federal government. She is suing DHS for shooting her and wounding her 7 times. This after Homeland Security originally branded her a, quote, domestic terrorist, claiming she rammed agents' vehicles with her car. But the evidence simply did not exist, and the DOJ had to drop the case. Now, new evidence does appear to contradict DHS claims. Last October, Martinez was honking to warn others about immigration enforcement. Agent Charles Exum shot her 5 times. Video showed an agent steering into her vehicle. Exum told the FBI all 5 shots went through the windshield. The ballistics do not match that. 3 bullets hit the passenger side, 1 in the back, and text messages show agents calling Exum a, quote, legend and offering him beers 4 hours later while Martinez was in the hospital. Now, Commander Greg Bavino also sent Exum an email extending his retirement and praising what he did. Attorney Chris Parenti today says the timing raises questions.
Chief of Border Patrol, while Marimar's in the hospital hooked up to IVs, hopefully going to survive, is emailing the agent saying, good afternoon. I'd like, of all the things, right? I'd like to extend an offer to extend your retirement by age 57. So what message does this send to all the agents, okay? If you shoot a protester while you're wearing the Border Patrol uniform, the first thing you're going to get within 4 hours of the shooting, first of all, there will be no investigation. Second, there'll be no administrative review.
And Mr. Parenti joins us now, the attorney for Marimar Martinez, of course. Chris Parenti, thanks for speaking with us. So this evidence that you put on display today that the judge released and allowed to go into the public sphere, what story does it tell about what happened that day?
Thanks for having me, Paris. Look, it tells the story that we've been trying to tell everybody since this started, that you cannot trust what the government is telling you right now, right? I mean, consistently from within minutes of this shooting of Marimar by ICE agents, the government has been putting out this narrative that she's a domestic terrorist, that she rammed them, that they were trapped and couldn't move their vehicle. I mean, we've now shown, you know, the U.S. Attorney's Office fought it for months, but after a tongue lashing by a federal judge, they were forced to release this evidence. And you can now see for your own eyes, you go to the website and look at this stuff. These agents were not trapped, that these agents swerved into her. And that they were never boxed in, that they jumped out and started shooting her. And, you know, that email from Greg Bavino, the head of Border Patrol, sent to this agent 3 hours after the shooting, shows you why this happens and why it continues to happen in Minneapolis. It's because Border Patrol is this agency that's creating a culture of violence where they're encouraging this behavior, they're promoting this behavior, and they're rewarding agents for shooting U.S. citizens who are engaged in peaceful protest. I've never seen anything like it.
And there are text messages where Exum is saying not only Bovino praising him, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, and quote unquote El Jefe, which we assume means the president. And now today we hear the news that Exum has been put on administrative leave. So what do you make of the fact that this news comes across today versus text messages and emails showing the higher-ups praising what he did that day?
Yeah, this is the first time we've heard that Exum has been put on administrative leave. Again, we've been told that there's an open criminal investigation into him. I'm hopeful that's happening, although I'm not optimistic because the FBI still has Marimar's car and they can't do the investigation they need to do until I sign this form, which I will sign as soon as they send it to me. But ever since the shootings in Minneapolis, the federal prosecutor assigned to this case has sort of gone radio silent, which is unfortunately somewhat typical of this administration and how they pursue investigations of these agents for unlawful shootings. So
you're saying there might be an investigation going on, a federal investigation? Is there any evidence or indication that there could be a state-level investigation or any other law enforcement authority?
Well, I mean, the playbook for this should be a federal investigation by the FBI. We gave consent for them to hold on to Marimar's vehicle. We think that the ballistics, just from my naked eye, I can see that the bullet went from the back of the car to the front of the car, which is completely inconsistent with the agent's claim that Marimar was driving at him. So our hope is that the FBI will do the job that they are empowered to do. We've allowed them to keep the car, and once they do that ballistics analysis, it should lead to charges against Agent Exum, in my opinion.
Is there an argument to be made, and we saw the video, and it does appear that the driver is swerving into Martinez's car. I don't even know that DOJ is denying this at this point, and they dropped this case pretty quickly because it seemed like they knew that there's absolutely nothing here to convict. But Could you make the case that the agents thought they were boxed in? They might have mistook being hit for it being Marimar Martinez's car, or is there nothing there that shows that they should have even believed that they were under threat?
Well, two things, Paris. One, they certainly could have believed it. Again, this agent came from Canada. He's probably used to elk walking around, and now he's on Kedzie on a Saturday morning. Like I was boxed in on my way over to the studio today. If you go by that mentality, right? That's called Chicago traffic. But there was no coordination of these cars. It was just simply cars on the road, which maybe there aren't in his town up in Maine, and he got freaked out. I don't know. But what I do know is that they completely lied about being trapped. Right? There's a diagram that the agent drew after the fact saying that they could not go forward, and he drew two cars in front of them. But we have obtained video that shows there were no cars in front of him. So there's no way you can, a lie in Maine is the same thing as a lie here in Chicago. And so once agents start lying and try to kind of rewrite history, that's where you know that this is not an honest mistake, and this is an actual cover up to justify what they know is a bad shoot.
And you announced today a civil lawsuit. Does this mean you might, do you believe there should be attempted murder charges here, or is that going to be the crux of the civil investigation that you do?
Look, I believe that there needs to be some investigation, because I don't want this agent who is so trigger happy that he's going to shoot a fleeing vehicle and hit an unarmed Montessori school teacher in our community. I don't want him going out to any other cities. And if you look at those text messages, again, I've worked as a federal prosecutor for 14 years. I have never worked with federal agents who are excited about using their service weapon. This guy is bragging to his friends about shooting this woman and saying, beers for life for you. Great job. Put that in your book. That is not how federal law enforcement agents typically talk. And if we know that that's how they're speaking, they should not be wearing the uniform of any federal agency. And I don't understand why Kristi Noem can't see that. Forget administrative leave. This guy should have been fired months ago.
Yeah.
We can't have people like that patrolling the community.
And typically, even local law enforcement, if they are caught up in some kind of shooting, it typically weighs on them psychologically in a different sense. They usually tend not to celebrate it. But Chris Parenti, thank you so much for speaking with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And earlier today, we spoke with Illinois Republican Congressman Darren LaHood about everything going on right now on the Hill, Epstein, immigration. But I began with some of the strange goings-on from the White House over the last 10 days, including the president's claims that the IRS owes him $10 billion and his desire to have Republicans, quote, take over elections. Why should the U.S. Treasury pay $10 billion to the president here?
Well, I'm not sure they should. First of all, we don't have $10 billion to give away. The president may have a valid claim, but we're $38 trillion in debt. We don't have $10 billion to give to the president.
What about the call to have Republicans, quote, take over elections, or the call to nationalize elections? I know the press secretary tried to say that was just the SAVE Act, but the president doubled down and said no. I mean, he wants them nationalized.
Well, listen, I believe in limited federal government. States are the laboratories of democracy, and states' rights are in our Constitution. So I believe, I may not like what California does or what Illinois does at the state level, but they have elected representatives in Illinois. They can make their own decisions. I think we have enough to worry about at the federal level. I would be very cautious about federalizing our elections. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't require an ID to vote. If you go buy a six-pack of beer, you need an ID. If you get on a plane, you need an ID. If you go rent a car, you need an ID. So I think asking someone to produce an ID to vote is completely acceptable. I think we ought to have that at the federal level. I don't think that is nationalizing elections. And so common sense reforms like that, I think, make sense.
You kind of bring up some of the issues in the SAVE Act, which might get a vote here. But in terms of Illinois, would that mean that folks would have to present a birth certificate or a passport as opposed to just their driver's license?
Well, I think a driver's license will be sufficient. We have real ID now. I think there's a clear definition we can all come up with, like we use for, again, buying a six-pack of beer, getting on a plane, or renting a car. There's lots of examples. Hey, to get into the Democratic convention last year, in some places you need an ID. So there's plenty of examples of how we can structure that. People want to have trust in our election system, in our democracy, and voting. And unfortunately, Paris, a lot of people don't. I think this is an easy, common sense way to do that. Require an ID to vote. I think we can. It's an 80% issue when you poll people, and that's part of what the SAVE Act focuses on.
And speaking of kind of separation of powers and federalism, Congress does have an opportunity potentially tonight to vote to rescind the tariff on Canada. Is that a vote that you would vote in the affirmative, or how would you vote on that?
I don't think we should predicate our economic policy on tariffs. Now, do I think there are bad actors that play by a different set of rules and standards, China, others, that we ought to be implementing tariffs on? Yeah, I think we should. But I would just say I don't think we should be governing by discharge petitions, which unfortunately this is a little bit of a gimmick, Paris, the way that this is being brought to the floor. It didn't go through a committee, didn't get a legislative hearing on it. There was no debate. It's done through a discharge petition. So I'm all for having a debate, and I've spoken out publicly about hopefully the Supreme Court rules against IEPA and we can reduce some of these tariff burdens. I'm supportive of doing that.
So doing that in the standard legislative process, but not through a discharge petition, which is basically what the mechanism that got the Epstein files reduced. So why don't I dovetail onto that? Are you satisfied with what you've seen from the DOJ, or do you believe that there should be more unredactions and frankly, when the DOJ says there will be no prosecution, there's no evidence of co-conspirators, does that hold any water based on what you've seen at this point? Isn't there evidence of your prosecutor? I mean, do you see any other evidence that would warrant at least further investigation?
The answer is yes. I think there is plenty of room for potential prosecutions. I think we have not seen all the facts and evidence. Not everything has been unredacted or released yet. I think there is plenty of opportunities to have further prosecutorial investigations. As I've said multiple times, we need to have a thorough and comprehensive investigation. Cases need to be brought before the grand jury, whether that's at the state or federal level. And I think the more transparency we can have on this, the better. I voted multiple times for the release of the Epstein files, and I'll continue to push for that moving forward. The bottom line is rich men should not be protected. And I think there's a perception that they have been protected. No one has been held accountable. No one has gone to jail, and no one has been put in prison. That has to happen, in my view.
And one of those rich men did testify before the Senate, and that's the current U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who was not truthful, or at least didn't kind of give the extent of his relationship with Epstein before some of these files showed a much more involved relationship. Do you believe he should be able to stay on in that post, or should he resign?
Well, I think nobody should be above the law at all, no matter what your position is. And I think that applies to everybody. I have not looked at the facts and evidence specifically related to him, but obviously if he was untruthful in his Senate confirmation hearing, I didn't watch that. I wasn't a part of that. But clearly there ought to be an investigation and a full accounting of that.
All right. Let's talk about DHS. Should the American people expect that there will not be a funding agreement by the deadline, and that DHS will have to shut down, and that might affect TSA and some of the other ways that DHS kind of is involved in Americans' day-to-day lives?
We should do everything possible to make sure that the DHS is funded, the Department of Homeland Security, but there's also a number of other agencies included in that: FEMA, Coast Guard, TSA, as you referenced. I mean, these are important federal workers. They play an immense role in our society, so we ought to be able to fund that. Now, we're in the middle of negotiations on that. Can we reach a resolution? I know the White House is negotiating with Chuck Schumer. I hope they continue to negotiate. If for some reason they can't reach a resolution by Friday, we ought to pass another continuing resolution for a couple of weeks to keep those negotiations going on. You saw already after what happened in Minneapolis, Paris, there's been about 700 DHS personnel that have been removed from Minneapolis. There's been a decision made by the Department of Homeland Security to have body cams on the DHS officers. I think those are reasonable changes and things that have happened that have helped to dissipate the atmosphere there. We need to continue to do that in these negotiations, and I'm supportive of that.
So it sounds like you're supportive of some of these things that Democrats have called for, like body cameras or, unmasking, um, and identification, and perhaps less aggressive tactics. So let me ask you, since you're kind enough to give us your time, in the 16th district, in your district, is there anything specific that your constituents should be looking out for in terms of legislation, in terms of federal funding?
Well, we passed a number of our appropriation bills last week, and we were proud to bring back $19 million to our district to basically 12 different projects throughout our district, from Rockford to Bloomington Normal to Peoria and Grundy County and a lot of our rural areas, infrastructure projects, helping out a number of our nonprofits, working on economic development. But these projects that came through the appropriations process were done in a bipartisan way and really highlight opportunities for federal dollars to come partner with our local, state, municipal dollars to help a number of projects throughout my district. So I was proud to announce that last week and look forward to the implementation, the spending of these dollars that will help with public safety, help with our educational institutions, help with a number of our farmers. Proud to play a role in that, and it's good news for the 16th district.
All right, Congressman, thanks so much. We appreciate you joining us as always.
Okay, Paris, take care. Thank you.
All right, all the best now. And when we come back, it's United versus American in the battle for O'Hare. Stay tuned. The Battle of O'Hare. It sounds like some infamous World War II matchup or something, but it actually pertains to the war between the country's two dominant airlines, American and United, and who gets the primo spots once the brand new O'Hare redesign is finished. It's the subject of an article in this month's Chicago Magazine, and joining us is the reporter on the article, Lee Giangreco. Thanks for being here, Lee.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You got it. So this fight's getting pretty chippy between these two airlines. What ultimately is at the heart of it?
Yeah, so in order to understand what's happening, let's take it back a little bit to the pandemic, right? That's when air travel cratered. And as a result, places like O'Hare that relied on business and international travel really took a hit. So then what happened a few months later is people did start taking flights again, but they were going to the Sun Belt. So American, that had a bunch of routes out of Chicago O'Hare, moved those over to the south. Now that left an opening for United, which had an advantage. So what you have now is that United has more gates than American. And then American, in this past year, when the city was reallocating gates, they got way fewer gates, and they sued the city saying, hey, you haven't given us enough time to catch up, to get more routes and get busier. So now you basically have these two big airlines that are fighting over territory.
There's only a certain amount of gates, and we talked about the renovations happening right now.
Sure.
So how does the renovation play into this battle?
So yeah, renovation has been going on for 3 mayors now. And of course, that was also interrupted by the pandemic. And now you have all of these flights going out. The traffic out of O'Hare is even busier than Atlanta. You and I were talking about this. That's great for the airport. That makes it really difficult for construction of this new airport. So now the city is wondering, okay, do we stay with the current schedule of construction where we have Terminal 1, which is under construction now, then the big fancy Jeannie Gang designed global terminal, and then Terminal 2? Or do we maybe reassess things because of all this traffic and switch things up?
And now, you know, it's getting kind of personal in their advertising because everyone saw this billboard. Was it off the Kennedy where United was kind of dinging American?
Yeah, AA Advantage. Exactly. Yeah. So as I've mentioned in my article, there might be a little bit of a personal beef between United's CEO, Scott Kirby, and American CEO, Robert Esom. So actually, Scott Kirby used to work at United, at American. He was ousted in 2016.
And now he's a top dog at United.
Exactly.
So there's a personal thing there.
Right.
What does all this mean for the traveler that wants to travel to Phoenix or Denver or Seattle or California, wherever? Does this mean they might fight to have lower fares?
Well, yeah, you know, competition is always good. American has been adding more and more routes in an effort to gain back some of that territory that they've lost. And O'Hare is a dual hub, so that's always been good for finding a better fare.
How do you think this is going to wind up? We assume this renovation should be completed in the next few years, although that's
we'll
really
see. Don't get too excited, Paris.
Yeah. So how does this resolve itself?
Well, you know, it's hard to say because, again, they do allocate those number of gates every year. So I really think it's going to depend on how many more routes American is adding. They've been very aggressive with that. When I spoke with some of the aviation analysts for my piece, they did say basically that American is probably never going to catch up to United. You're never going to see them on equal footing at O'Hare, but we could see American getting more and more space perhaps over the years. But I think it'll depend on a lot. It'll depend on the traffic. It'll depend how this construction goes and whether they have enough money for that.
All right, Legion Greco, very interesting article, and that is all for us tonight. We want to remind you that we are starting our Chicago Report debate series next Monday. All week, we have primary election matchups beginning on February 16th with the campaign for U.S. Senate featuring the Democratic candidates. That's going to be a great matchup. Whole lot more. Have a great evening. We're back tomorrow, everybody. Good night.